What's up, history buffs? Listen up, because I'm about to tell you a story so insane that if Hollywood made it into a movie, you'd walk out of the theater saying, "Yeah, right, that's way too unrealistic." Today we're diving deep into one of the most controversial questions in ancient history. How did a 14-year-old Syrian teenager manage to become Roman emperor, cross-dress in public, allegedly work as a prostitute, marry 5 different people including 2 men, and nearly destroy the most powerful empire on earth, all before getting brutally murdered at age 18? Forget everything you think you know about Roman emperors. We're not talking about Marcus Aurelius writing philosophical meditations or Augustus building an empire. We're talking about Elagabalus, a name that still makes historians uncomfortable 2,000 years later. Picture this. It's 218 AD, and the Roman Empire is having what we'd call a major identity crisis. The last emperor, Caracalla, just got assassinated while taking a bathroom break during a military campaign. I'm not making this up, folks. The guy who murdered thousands of people in Alexandria got stabbed to death while literally answering nature's call. The empire is in chaos, the military is restless, and into this power vacuum steps a Syrian grandmother with a plan so audacious it would make Game of Thrones look like a Disney movie. Her name is Julia Maesa, and she's about to pull off the most successful and ultimately catastrophic political coup in Roman history. But here's the kicker. Her secret weapon isn't an army, isn't gold, isn't even political connections. It's her 14-year-old grandson, a kid who's about to become the most sexually controversial ruler Rome has ever seen. Now, before we dive deeper into this absolute madness, smash that like button if you're ready to have your mind completely blown by what actually happened in ancient Rome. And drop a comment right now. On a scale of 1 to 10, how weird do you think Roman politics could actually get? Because I guarantee you, whatever number you're thinking, multiply it by about 100. Here's what makes Elagabalus so fascinating and disturbing at the same time. This wasn't just some random teenager who stumbled into power. This was a carefully orchestrated plan that involved religious manipulation, military bribery, and sexual politics on a scale that would make modern political scandals look like church picnics. And it all started with a rock. Yeah, you heard that right. A rock. Specifically, a black meteorite that had fallen from the sky in the Syrian city of Emesa, where young Elagabalus served as high priest of the sun god Elagabal. The locals believed this rock was literally a piece of their god, and our future emperor had been raised from birth to worship it, dance around it, and perform religious ceremonies that involved, and I'm putting this delicately here, practices that would have made conservative Romans lose their minds. But Julia Maesa, this kid's grandmother, saw something the rest of the world missed. She looked at her feminine, religiously obsessed, sexually unconventional grandson and thought, you know what? This boy is going to be emperor of Rome. And the craziest part? She was absolutely right. Hold up, pause the video right now, and guess what happens next. How do you think a Syrian grandmother convinces the most powerful military in the world to make her teenage grandson their leader? Drop your theories in the comments because what actually happened is so much wilder than anything you're imagining. The plan starts with a lie so bold it would make any modern politician jealous. Julia Maesa spreads a rumor that her grandson isn't just some random Syrian priest. He's actually the illegitimate son of the recently murdered Emperor Caracalla. Now, this is complete fiction. Caracalla had never even met this kid. But here's the thing about desperate soldiers far from home. They'll believe any story that gives them hope and, more importantly, a paycheck. Real talk. This next part is going to sound absolutely bonkers, but stick with me because it gets so much weirder. Julia Maesa doesn't just tell this lie, she backs it up with cold, hard cash. She's been saving money for years, and now she uses it to bribe an entire Roman legion. Picture this. Thousands of battle-hardened soldiers who've conquered half the known world, and they're about to swear loyalty to a 14-year-old cross-dressing priest because his grandma paid them off. And this is where our story takes a hard left turn into territory that's going to make the rest of this video absolutely unforgettable. But here's where things get really wild because Julia Maesa's plan actually works. The Third Gallic Legion looks at this 14-year-old kid in his flowing robes and priestly makeup, listens to Grandma's story about him being Caracalla's secret son, counts their bribe money, and says, "You know what? Sure, let's make this teenager Emperor of Rome." What happens next is basically the ancient world's version of a hostile corporate takeover, except instead of boardrooms and lawyers, we're talking about sword fights and actual heads rolling in the dirt. May 16th, 218 AD. The day that changes everything. Young Elagabalus, still going by his birth name Varius Avitus Bassianus at this point, gets proclaimed emperor by his bought-and-paid-for legion. But here's the thing that's going to blow your mind. The current emperor, Macrinus, is literally camped out just a few miles away with his own army. So we've got two guys claiming to be emperor, both with armies, both ready to fight, and one of them hasn't even hit puberty yet. Now, if you're thinking this sounds like a recipe for disaster, congratulations. You understand Roman politics better than most Romans did. But plot twist incoming. The kid wins. Here's how insane this battle gets. Picture the most dramatic movie scene you've ever watched. Maybe the final fight in Avengers Endgame or the charge of the Rohirrim in Lord of the Rings. Now imagine that, except it's real life. The fate of the known world hangs in the balance, and one side is led by a cross-dressing teenager who worships a rock. The Battle of Antioch lasts 3 days. 3 days. That's longer than most modern wars, and it's all happening because a Syrian grandma decided her grandson should rule the world. Macrinus throws everything he's got at them. Professional soldiers, cavalry, siege weapons, the works. But Julia Mesa has something more powerful than military strategy. She's got more money and a better story. Drop a comment right now if you've ever seen a more ridiculous military campaign in any movie or TV show, because I guarantee you Hollywood has never come up with anything this bonkers. During the battle, something happens that perfectly captures just how weird this whole situation is. Elagabalus, remember, he's 14 and has probably never held a sword in his life, doesn't fight. Instead, he stands behind the battle lines in his full priestly regalia, performing religious ceremonies to his Syrian sun god. While men are literally dying for him, this kid is dancing and chanting prayers to a meteorite. And it works. Macrinus's soldiers start switching sides mid-battle. Why? Because they're looking at this situation and thinking, well, our current emperor is getting his butt kicked by a teenager. Maybe the teenager has divine favor. Ancient soldiers were incredibly superstitious folks. If you could convince them the gods were on your side, you were halfway to victory. But the real turning point comes when Macrinus realizes he's about to lose and does what any rational person would do. He runs away. The Emperor of Rome literally abandons his army and flees for his life. His soldiers see their leader running, look over at the dancing teenager, and basically go, well, I guess we're working for the kid now. June 8th, 218 AD. Macrinus gets caught trying to escape and is executed. Just like that, a 14-year-old Syrian priest becomes the most powerful person on earth. And this is where our story stops being about politics and starts being about something way more shocking. Because here's what nobody tells you about Elagabalus in history class. The cross-dressing wasn't a side hobby. It wasn't some weird quirk that historians exaggerated. It was central to who this person was, and it was about to turn Roman society completely upside down. The new emperor's first official act? Changing his name from Varius Avitus Bassianus to Marcus Aurelius Antoninus Elagabalus. But more importantly, he starts making it very clear that he's not your typical Roman emperor. The toga? Gone. The military uniform? Forget about it. Elagabalus shows up to official ceremonies wearing silk robes, jewelry, makeup, and what Roman sources describe as women's clothing. Real talk. If you think modern politicians cause controversy, you haven't seen anything yet. This is about to get so much more intense that it's going to make every political scandal you've ever heard about look like a minor disagreement at a PTA meeting. Buckle up, Buttercup, because we're about to enter the part of this story where Roman historians basically threw their scrolls across the room and screamed, "What is happening?" So our boy Elagabalus arrives in Rome in 219 AD, and the first thing he does is completely blow everyone's minds. Remember, Romans had very specific ideas about how emperors should look and act. Think stern, masculine, wearing togas, making speeches about military conquest and civic duty. You know, the whole, I am a serious leader of serious men doing serious empire things vibe. Elagabalus shows up looking like he's heading to the ancient world's most fabulous drag show. We're talking full makeup, and I mean full makeup. Eyeshadow, rouge, lipstick, the works. Jewelry that would make a Kardashian jealous. Silk robes in colors so bright they probably hurt people's eyes. And hair. Oh my God, the hair. Roman sources describe elaborate hairstyles that took hours to complete, styled in what they explicitly call feminine fashion. But wait, it gets better. This isn't just happening in private. Elagabalus is showing up to official state functions dressed like this. Senate meetings, military ceremonies, religious festivals. Picture the most formal government event you can imagine. Maybe a State of the Union address. And now imagine the president walking in wearing a ball gown and a full face of makeup. That's basically what's happening here. Except it's the year 219 and nobody knows how to process this information. The Roman senators are sitting there like, Your Majesty, is this normal where you come from? And Elagabalus is basically responding with, this is normal where I come from now, deal with it. Let me know in the comments, have you ever seen a more dramatic culture clash in your entire life? Because we're just getting started. Now here's where things get really spicy. The cross-dressing isn't happening in a vacuum. Elagabalus starts making changes to Roman religion that are so radical they make Martin Luther look like a moderate reformer. Remember that black meteorite rock from Syria? Well, guess what's about to become the official god of the Roman Empire? That's right, folks. The god Jupiter, you know, king of the gods, been running the show for centuries, has temples everywhere, suddenly gets demoted. Elagabalus literally moves his Syrian sun god rock into the most sacred temple in Rome and announces that from now on, everybody's worshipping Elagabal. But it's not just the religion that's changing. It's how the religion gets practiced. Elagabalus starts performing Syrian religious ceremonies in front of horrified Roman audiences, and these ceremonies involve dancing, chanting, music, and what Roman sources describe as un-Roman behavior, which is ancient historian code for stuff that made us so uncomfortable we can't even write it down properly. The Romans are watching their teenage emperor dance around a rock while wearing what they consider women's clothing, and they're collectively having the ancient equivalent of a nervous breakdown. And then, because apparently this situation wasn't complicated enough already, Elagabalus decides to get married. Not once, not twice, 5 times, to different people, including, according to Roman sources, at least 2 men. Hold up. Before we continue, pause the video and try to imagine being a Roman senator in 219 AD trying to explain this to your wife when you get home. Honey, you're not going to believe what happened at work today. Our new emperor, who's younger than our son, showed up in a dress and announced he's married to a gladiator named Heracles. Now, I need to be crystal clear about something here, because this is where a lot of modern historians get into heated debates. The Roman sources that describe Elagabalus are written by people who absolutely hated him, so we have to take some of these claims with a massive grain of salt. These aren't neutral observers writing objective history. These are political enemies who wanted to make Elagabalus look as bad as possible. But here's the thing that even his enemies couldn't deny. Whatever was happening with Elagabalus's gender expression and sexuality, it was happening very publicly, very dramatically, and it was absolutely terrifying the Roman establishment. The cross-dressing alone would have been scandalous enough. But when you combine it with the religious changes, the multiple marriages, and what's about to happen next, you start to understand why this story has been shocking people for 2,000 years. Because we haven't even gotten to the prostitution allegations yet. And trust me, that's where this story goes from historically controversial to absolutely unhinged. All right, everyone, gather round because we're about to dive into the part of this story that made ancient Roman historians clutch their pearls so hard they probably left permanent fingerprints. We're talking about allegations so wild that even by Roman standards, and remember, these are the people who turned public executions into entertainment, everyone was like, Okay, this is too much. So here's where things get absolutely bonkers. According to multiple Roman sources, Elagabalus didn't just dress like what they considered a woman, he allegedly worked as one, specifically as a prostitute. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, but literally standing in brothels and on street corners, soliciting customers for money. Now, before your brain completely breaks trying to process this information, let me paint you a picture of just how insane this accusation actually is. This isn't just any random person we're talking about. This is the Emperor of Rome, the most powerful human being on the planet. The guy who controls the largest military force in history and has access to literally infinite wealth. And Roman sources claim he's sneaking out of the palace at night to work the streets. The historian Cassius Dio, who lived during Elagabalus's reign and presumably saw some of this stuff firsthand, writes that the emperor would stand naked at the door of a brothel and proposition passers-by. Another source claims he would paint his eyes, wear wigs, and actively compete with actual prostitutes for customers. Drop a comment right now if you can think of any modern equivalent to this story, because I've been racking my brain and I literally cannot come up with anything that comes close to this level of pure, unfiltered chaos. But wait, it gets weirder, because apparently regular prostitution wasn't enough. Roman sources claim that Elagabalus would specifically position himself in the most expensive brothels and charge premium prices. We're talking about the ancient equivalent of a high-end escort service, except the escort is the leader of the free world. Now, here's where we need to pump the brakes and talk about what might actually be happening here. Because as juicy as these stories are, we're dealing with Roman political propaganda, and Romans had very specific ways of destroying their enemies' reputations. See, in Roman culture, there was literally no worse accusation you could make about a man than claiming he was sexually passive or feminine. It was political character assassination 101. You want to destroy someone's credibility? You spread rumors about their sexuality. You want to make them look unfit to rule. You question their masculinity. So when Roman historians claim Elagabalus was working as a prostitute, we have to ask, is this actually what happened? Or is this the ancient equivalent of a really nasty political attack ad? Here's what we know for sure. Elagabalus was definitely engaging in behavior that Romans considered sexually deviant. The cross-dressing was real. Too many sources confirm it, and it was too public to fake. The multiple marriages to both men and women were real. The religious ceremonies that involved what Romans called un-Roman practices were definitely happening. But the prostitution? That's where things get murky. Because here's the thing about Roman sources. They loved to exaggerate sexual scandals, especially when it came to emperors they didn't like. These same historians claimed that Emperor Caligula made his horse a senator and that Nero fiddled while Rome burned. Stories that modern historians have pretty much debunked as political propaganda. So why would they make up the prostitution allegations? Simple. Because in Roman society, nothing was more emasculating than being sexually available for money. It was the ultimate insult, the perfect way to make someone look completely unfit for power. But here's the plot twist that's going to completely change how you think about this story. It might not matter whether the prostitution allegations were true or false, because the mere fact that Romans could believe these stories tells us something way more interesting about what was actually happening in the palace. Real talk, this next part is going to sound absolutely wild, but it explains everything. What if Elagabalus wasn't just cross-dressing for fun or religious reasons? What if this whole situation was actually about something much deeper and more revolutionary than anyone realized at the time? Because we're about to explore the possibility that the Roman Empire was being ruled by someone who, in modern terms, we might recognize as transgender. And that changes everything about this story. Plot twist incoming, folks, because what I'm about to tell you is going to completely flip your understanding of this entire situation. Modern historians have started looking at the Elagabalus story through a very different lens, and their conclusions are absolutely mind-blowing. Here's the thing that nobody talks about in traditional history classes. What if all the scandalous behavior that Romans were freaking out about wasn't actually scandalous at all? What if it was just a person trying to live authentically in a society that had absolutely no framework for understanding gender identity? Let me break this down for you. Roman sources consistently describe Elagabalus asking to be called by feminine names. Not as a joke, not as part of some religious ceremony, but as a serious, ongoing request. The historian Cassius Dio claims that Elagabalus preferred to be addressed as domina instead of dominus, basically lady instead of lord. But here's where it gets really interesting. According to these same Roman sources, Elagabalus allegedly offered massive rewards to any physician who could perform what we would now call gender reassignment surgery. We're talking about someone desperately seeking medical intervention to change their physical body to match their gender identity. Now pause the video right now and think about what this means. This isn't 2023 with modern medical understanding and LGBTQ+ rights movements. This is 220 AD, in the most aggressively masculine society in human history, and someone with unlimited power is apparently trying to transition. The implications are staggering. If this interpretation is correct, then the Roman Empire, the foundation of Western civilization, was briefly ruled by what we would now recognize as a transgender woman. And suddenly all the crazy behavior starts making perfect sense. The cross-dressing? Not a political statement or religious practice, just someone wearing clothes that matched their gender identity. The multiple marriages to men? A woman seeking romantic relationships with male partners? The alleged prostitution? Possibly someone exploring their sexuality in the only way available to them in a society that had no concept of transgender identity. But wait, there's more. Roman sources describe Elagabalus expressing what can only be described as gender dysphoria. Ancient historians write about the emperor's distress at having a male body, their desire to be seen and treated as a woman, and their attempts to live as authentically as possible despite the social constraints. Let me know in the comments. Have you ever heard of a more tragic historical figure? Because when you look at it this way, Elagabalus isn't some depraved monster corrupting Roman values. They're a teenager trying to figure out their identity while literally ruling the world with no support system, no understanding from society, and no medical options. And this reframes everything about how Romans reacted to Elagabalus. It wasn't just political opposition or moral outrage. It was a society having a collective panic attack because their most fundamental assumptions about gender and power were being challenged by the most powerful person on earth. Think about it. Romans built their entire culture around rigid gender roles. Men were warriors, leaders, conquerors. Women were wives, mothers, property. The idea that gender could be fluid, that someone could choose their identity, that biological sex and social role might not match, this was literally inconceivable to them. So when Elagabalus showed up challenging every single one of these assumptions while wielding absolute power, Roman society basically had a collective nervous breakdown. They didn't have the vocabulary to understand what was happening, so they described it in the only terms they knew: corruption, deviance, and political scandal. But here's where this story gets really tragic, because Romans weren't just confused. They were terrified. And when people are terrified, they do terrible things to protect what they think is normal. Buckle up, because we're about to see how this fear and misunderstanding leads to one of the most brutal political assassinations in Roman history. And it all starts with the person who put Elagabalus on the throne in the first place, Grandma Julia Maesa. And this is where our story takes the darkest turn possible, because the person who's about to destroy Elagabalus is the same person who made them emperor in the first place. Talk about family drama that makes every reality TV show look like a peaceful Sunday dinner. Julia Maesa is watching her grand plan completely fall apart. Remember, she orchestrated this entire coup to put her family in power and restore Syrian influence in Rome. But instead of a controllable puppet emperor, she's got a teenager who's actively alienating every single person who matters in Roman politics. The senators hate Elagabalus. The military is getting restless. The Roman people are confused and angry. And worst of all, from Julia Maesa's perspective, her grandchild is making decisions based on personal authenticity rather than political strategy. So Grandma does what any ruthlessly ambitious political mastermind would do. She starts planning to replace her own grandchild with a different grandchild. Enter Alexander Severus, Elagabalus's cousin. Picture the complete opposite of everything Elagabalus represents. Where Elagabalus is flamboyant, Alexander is conservative. Where Elagabalus challenges gender norms, Alexander embraces traditional masculinity. Where Elagabalus worships a Syrian rock, Alexander respects Roman gods. In other words, Alexander is everything the Roman establishment wants in an emperor, and Julia Maesa knows it. But here's the truly twisted part. She doesn't just abandon Elagabalus. She starts actively working against them while pretending to be supportive. Imagine your own grandmother secretly plotting to have you murdered and replaced by your cousin, all while cooking you dinner and asking about your day. That's basically what's happening here. Real talk. Have you ever seen a more ice-cold political betrayal in your entire life? Drop a comment if you can think of anything that comes close to this level of family dysfunction. Julia Maesa starts by convincing Elagabalus to adopt Alexander as heir and co-emperor. She sells this as a smart political move. Look, honey, the people love Alexander. If you make him your partner, it'll calm everyone down and secure your reign. Elagabalus, who's still just 18 years old and probably desperate for family support, agrees. Worst decision ever. Because the moment Alexander gets any official power, Julia Maesa and her allies start promoting him as the real emperor. They spread rumors that Elagabalus is mentally unstable, sexually deviant, and unfit to rule. They start holding secret meetings with senators and military commanders, basically running a shadow campaign to replace one grandchild with another. And Elagabalus, who's dealing with the stress of ruling an empire while navigating their own identity crisis, starts to figure out what's happening. The paranoia kicks in. They realize their own family is plotting against them, and they begin making increasingly desperate attempts to remove Alexander from power. But it's too late. Julia Maesa has played this game for decades, and Elagabalus is still just a teenager who's been emperor for less than 4 years. In this chess match between a political mastermind and an inexperienced young ruler, there's only going to be one winner. By 222 AD, the situation has become completely unsustainable. Elagabalus is making erratic decisions. Alexander's supporters are getting bolder, and the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's own bodyguards, are starting to whisper about loyalty. Then comes the moment that seals Elagabalus's fate. In what might be the most tragic miscalculation in Roman history, Elagabalus decides to eliminate Alexander once and for all. They call the Praetorian Guard to a meeting, planning to order Alexander's execution and remove the threat to their power. But here's what Elagabalus doesn't understand. The Praetorian Guard has already been bought. Julia Maesa got to them first. So picture this scene. Elagabalus walks into what they think is going to be their moment of triumph, ready to eliminate their rival and secure their throne. Instead, they walk into their own execution. March 11th, 222 AD. Elagabalus and their mother Julia Soaemias enter the Praetorian camp expecting to give orders. Instead, they find themselves surrounded by soldiers who have already decided their fate. What happens next is so brutal that even Roman historians, who were used to political violence, describe it in shocked tones. We're talking about the murder of 2 people who never saw it coming, killed by the very people who were supposed to protect them. But the truly horrifying part isn't just the assassination itself. It's what happens afterward that shows you just how much the Roman establishment wanted to erase Elagabalus from history completely. And trust me, what they did to this 18-year-old's body after death is going to make everything we've talked about so far seem tame by comparison. Hold up. Before we dive into this next part, I need you to understand that what I'm about to describe is so disturbing that it shows you exactly how much hatred and fear Elagabalus had generated in Roman society. We're talking about post-mortem revenge that goes way beyond anything you've seen in the most twisted horror movie. So Elagabalus and their mother Julia Soamias are dead, murdered by the Praetorian Guard in what's supposedly a clean political transition. Alexander Severus becomes emperor, Julia Mesa gets her wish, and everyone should be happy. Right? Wrong. Because apparently just killing Elagabalus wasn't enough for the Romans. They needed to make absolutely sure that this person, and everything they represented, was completely destroyed. What happens next is called damnatio memoriae. Basically, the Roman equivalent of cancel culture, except instead of losing your Twitter account, they try to erase you from history entirely. But even by Roman standards, what they do to Elagabalus's memory is extreme. First, they drag the bodies through the streets of Rome. Not just Elagabalus, but their mother too. Picture the most powerful people in the world just a few hours earlier, now being pulled through the dirt by an angry mob while people cheer and throw things at the corpses. But that's just the beginning. Roman sources describe crowds mutilating the bodies, spitting on them, and doing things that are too graphic for YouTube's community guidelines. This isn't political justice. This is pure, unleashed hatred. Then they throw both bodies into the Tiber River. But even that's not enough, because the river keeps washing the bodies back to shore. So the Romans fish them out and burn them, then scatter the ashes to make sure there's literally nothing left. Drop a comment if you've ever heard of a more complete attempt to erase someone from existence, because this is next-level historical hatred. But the physical destruction is only part one. Now comes the systematic erasure of Elagabalus from Roman history. Every statue gets destroyed. Every inscription gets chiseled off monuments. Every coin gets melted down. They're literally trying to make it so that future generations will never know this person existed. The Senate issues official decrees declaring that Elagabalus's name should never be spoken again. Government documents get rewritten to remove any mention of the 4-year reign. It's like they're trying to create a gap in history where those years just don't exist. And here's the most chilling part. It almost worked. If it wasn't for a few historians who secretly kept records and some coins that survived in distant provinces, we might never have known the full story of Elagabalus at all. But why this level of hatred? Why not just the standard political assassination and move on? Because Elagabalus hadn't just challenged Roman political power, they had challenged Roman identity itself. See, Romans could handle corrupt emperors. They'd dealt with Nero, Caligula, Commodus, guys who were genuinely terrible rulers. But those emperors were still recognizably Roman men, even if they were bad at the job. Elagabalus was different. By challenging gender norms, sexual expectations, and religious traditions all at the same time, they had attacked the very foundation of what Romans thought made them Roman. It wasn't just political opposition, it was existential terror. The cross-dressing, the Syrian religion, the multiple marriages, the alleged prostitution. Each one of these things individually would have been scandalous. Altogether, they created a perfect storm of cultural panic that made Romans feel like their entire civilization was under attack. So when they killed Elagabalus, they weren't just removing a bad emperor. They were trying to kill an idea. The idea that Roman society could be different, that gender could be fluid, that power could look feminine, that an empire could be ruled by someone who didn't fit their narrow definition of masculinity. But here's the plot twist that's going to blow your mind. Despite all their efforts to erase Elagabalus from history, the story survived. And now, 2,000 years later, we're sitting here talking about this 18-year-old who ruled the Roman Empire for 4 years and challenged every assumption their society had about gender, power, and identity. The Romans tried to destroy Elagabalus completely. Instead, they created one of the most fascinating and complex figures in all of ancient history. And that brings us to the question we've been building toward this entire time. What does this story actually tell us about the relationship between power, identity, and society? All right, folks, we've reached the end of this absolutely wild journey, and it's time to answer the question that's been hanging over this entire story. Was Elagabalus really a cross-dressing emperor who prostituted the Roman Empire? Or is there something much deeper going on here? Here's the truth. Both things can be true at the same time, and that's what makes this story so powerful. Let's start with what we know for absolute certain. Elagabalus ruled Rome from 218 to 222 AD. They consistently dressed in what Romans considered women's clothing. They married multiple people, including men. They promoted Syrian religious practices that horrified traditional Romans, and they were brutally assassinated at age 18 by people who wanted to erase them from history. Everything else, the prostitution, the specific sexual practices, the most extreme allegations, comes from sources who had every reason to exaggerate and lie. But here's the thing. It doesn't matter whether every single accusation was true, because the confirmed facts alone tell us an incredible story. What we're looking at is possibly the first recorded case in Western history of someone using absolute power to live authentically according to their gender identity. Think about that for a second. The most powerful person in the world chose to risk everything, their throne, their life, their historical legacy, rather than conform to society's expectations about how they should look and act. That's not corruption. That's not political scandal. That's courage on a scale that's almost impossible to comprehend. But it's also tragedy, because Elagabalus was completely alone in this. No support system, no understanding from society, no medical options, no role models. Just an 18-year-old trying to figure out their identity while running an empire and dealing with family members who were literally plotting their murder. Real talk. Can you imagine facing that level of pressure and isolation at 18? Most of us can barely handle choosing a college major at that age, and Elagabalus was dealing with questions of identity, power, sexuality, and survival all at the same time. And here's what makes this story relevant today. The reaction to Elagabalus shows us exactly how societies respond when someone challenges their fundamental assumptions about gender and power. The fear, the hatred, the desperate attempt to erase them from history. Sound familiar? Drop a comment right now with your honest take. Do you think Elagabalus was a victim of their time? Or do you think they brought their fate on themselves? Because there's no easy answer here. What we can say is this. Elagabalus ruled for 4 years, and in that time, they managed to challenge every single norm that Roman society held sacred. They showed that an empire could function with a feminine ruler. They proved that gender roles weren't as fixed as people believed. They demonstrated that power didn't have to look masculine to be effective. The Romans were so threatened by these ideas that they tried to literally erase Elagabalus from existence. But 2,000 years later, here we are, still talking about this teenager who refused to pretend to be someone they weren't, even when pretending would have saved their life. So, was Elagabalus the cross-dressing emperor who prostituted the Roman Empire? In the most literal sense, probably not. The prostitution allegations are almost certainly political propaganda, and the corruption of the empire had more to do with military overspending and political instability than with anyone's gender expression. But was Elagabalus a revolutionary figure who used their power to challenge social norms around gender and sexuality? Absolutely. And was their story so threatening to traditional power structures that those structures tried to destroy them completely? 100%. The real scandal of Elagabalus isn't what they did in private. It's what they revealed about the fragility of social norms and the violence that societies will use to protect those norms when they feel threatened. What do you think? Was Elagabalus a misunderstood pioneer, a troubled teenager in over their head, or something else entirely? Let me know in the comments below, because this story raises questions about power, identity, and social change that are just as relevant today as they were 2,000 years ago. And if this video completely blew your mind, smash that subscribe button because history is full of stories this crazy that they never teach you in school. There's so much more insane stuff hiding in the past that's going to make you question everything you thought you knew about human civilization. Thanks for sticking with me through this absolutely wild ride, and I'll see you in the next video where we dive even deeper into the stories that history tried to bury.